They say that Andre Agassi's autobiography, Open, is the best sports autobiography ever written. The reason is Andre's not so normal life, his not so normal experiences, being one of the best in the world at something he didn't really enjoy growing up. How do you even do that? How do you become world class, something you don't really enjoy? This is the Andre Agassi story, especially for those who haven't read Open, but also for those who have. I asked him some of the deepest questions that sports fans would want to know, but I also asked him about life, about what he's doing after retirement, about all the businesses he's creating, about all his learnings from the sports world that he's applying in the business world, that he's applying in the world of edtech, very interestingly. This is Andre Agassi on The Ranveer Show. Tennis fans, you guys are going to love this one. Andre Agassi, namaste from India. Absolute honor, absolute pleasure having you on the show.
It is great to be here. I was just in India a few weeks back, and it's nice that we can stay connected now from even a distance if we have to.
Yes, and it's great for people like myself. I get to be connected to people like you through the internet. Beautiful times. Didn't think about this in 2003 when I saw you playing tennis. Never thought that I'd be speaking to you one day. So many questions about you, man. People know about your story through Open. Everyone even knows about what was happening in the background. When we're speaking about that book, Open, it's an autobiography. It's considered a heavy autobiography. If you had to summarize that entire autobiography into one paragraph, how would you do it?
Well, I would say that the book was designed for me to understand my own life through a literary lens, to make sense of a whirlwind that I could never sort of reconcile all my conflicts and contradictions. And the book actually evolved into a human journey that we all, while we do have different experiences, we all share the same journey, right? It was about fear and love being the great motivators. It was about taking ownership of one's life, even though one didn't choose it. It's about that coming of age. It's in some cases it's a recovery story from success to failure to success. So when I realized that this book, you don't learn about me as much as you learn about yourself, then I felt compelled to see it through.
I believe everyone's born with a purpose. Everyone's life boils down to a few purposes. What's the purpose of your life, according to you at this stage?
Well, that's a pretty broad question, but if I had to try to be narrow about it, my hope in life, both when I was on the court, also my philanthropic work, and also my businesses and personal life, is just if I interact with somebody, I want their life being better off for it. So I always try to stop in every moment, break down every engagement into these moments where you can really, maybe it's a kind word, maybe it's a life commitment, like what I've done in education. Maybe it's but it's always personal. It's always meaningful, and you always have the opportunity of making somebody's life better off for that engagement. So I take it one step at a time, knowing that the accumulation of that sort of engagement really leads to life-changing stuff.
Oh, beautiful. Do you have any idea about how many fans you have in India?
Well, I felt it when I'm there. I felt it across the world playing. I've ran into many of them over the years, and yeah, I've always felt very embraced, which is a wonderful feeling.
Is there anything you kind of take away from Indian culture for your own head or for your own mentality?
I do. I find the culture to be a very peaceful one, and I don't think anybody's process needs to be the same if your intentions are the same, and that's what we just talked about. So you really feel that spirit when you're there, regardless where somebody is in life. There's a sense of peace, calm, and stability to it. So I've always appreciated that, and I think second to that would be the food.
What do you like eating? What's your favorite Indian dish?
Oh my gosh, get spicier the better, man. I'm going Vindaloo all day, every day, twice on Sundays.
You gotta try Lucknowi food the next time you're here. Have you ever heard of
Okay.
it? So Lucknow is a part of North India. The
I,
cuisine was built for kings, built as in designed for kings. So you've got like meat that's as soft as like toothpaste, the
oh,
most complex kebabs, fantastic food. I'm vegetarian now, but that's that one part of non-vegetarian food that I really miss, Lucknowi food.
oh wow, that sounds magical.
You spoke about calm, peace. You spoke about the spirit within the human. Honest to God, I mean, I wasn't old enough to see you in the early 90s. I was born in 1993. But I have seen videos. And what I've picked up is that you had a lot of fire. Even when you were playing, you were flamboyant, but you played with a lot of fire. And then over the years, you kind of learned how to manage that fire even better. So would you agree if I said that, like that as you went forward, not just in your career, but also in your life? Like I think peace and stability is something you value a lot as of now, but it wasn't always the case. So back in the early 90s, what was going on in your head?
Well, I think really if you want to go back to the early 90s, you almost have to go back to the beginning, because the beginning was a very strong disconnect between me and the sport of tennis. I was the youngest of four children. My father was, let's just call him, very intense to say the least, and he saw tennis as the fastest road to the American dream. So he was pushing all of us kids without, even if it was compromising relationships. And I was sort of the last one where all the pressure sort of fell onto, but I also had that lens to see what tennis was doing to the relationships and to the feeling inside the home. And I resented that at an early age. I really resented it because I didn't choose tennis. My father sort of imposed it on me. And, that disconnect only grew and continued and eventually morphed into this, the biggest controversy in my book, which came on page one, which is that I hated tennis, with a very dark and secret passion. At 13, my father sent me away to a tennis academy, and it was 3,000 miles away from home. So it was like a military, boot camp, pecking order, depending on how you played. And again, I felt abandoned. I felt left. I felt separated. I felt more resentment. And then the only way to get out of that environment was to succeed. And so I was always motivated by this anxiety and this fear kind of based, inspiration that even when I turned pro didn't go away. Even when I won didn't go away, because here I was on a world stage, kind of being told who I was, and I didn't even know who I was. So that disconnect with tennis really gave me a strong resentment, towards it. So I think my journey overall that I am most proud about was that journey through all that fear in the first part of my career, as the motivator, to a point where I gave myself permission to quit at number one in the world, um, getting to number one in the world, to a point where I fell and had to make a real strong decision in my life. And that decision was either, retire or find my reason, right? And I didn't have anything to fall back on. So I think in part of that second half of that journey, finding that ownership and connection to something larger than me that was still connected to me was the transformation that happened. It didn't happen overnight, but no question led to a second half of my career that was a lot more successful, both from a accomplishment standpoint, but also internally. I was able to take in a lot more moments through a lens of that connection, not just with my purpose, but also with the people that were there. So it was a win for me all the way around. But that transformation was clear and it was played out in front of the world.
What happened at that point of transformation, at that pivot? What went on in your head? Was there external influences? How did you kind of change your perception of things?
So, as my father used to introduce me to people when I was 7 years old as a future number one tennis player in the world, you can imagine the pressure that you feel is on your shoulders. And there I was, knocking down tournaments and going up in the rankings and winning championships and getting to number one. And every time I won, it was such a clear. It was such a clear fact that that wasn't going to do it for me. It didn't scratch that disconnect I was talking about. And I kind of had in my mind that being number one probably would. At least I hoped it would. And then I remember getting to number one, and I remember that feeling so distinctly. And that feeling, quite honestly, was nothing. And when I had that, I knew there was nothing for me to do on a tennis court that would ever satisfy what I was looking for. And I had enough success where I could walk away from the game. But instead of sort of stepping up and making that decision, then I kind of went on this spiral. I kind of stopped caring for a couple of years. I started doing things I probably shouldn't do. I knew I was I was in a tailspin, and the world was just watching my ranking fall. And I got to 140 in the world, which sounds amazing from one perspective, but when you go from number one, you feel like a complete failure. And I had to ask for wild cards, for tournaments to let me play because I wasn't ranked high enough to get in. And I remember one tournament where I did get in through a wild card, and then I lost first round exactly how I should have, really quick, and wasn't prepared. And my coach kind of confronted me. My coach sort of put me in a room and said, you're too good to do this to yourself. We're gonna either retire or we're gonna start over. And then my mind started spinning. I never hated tennis so much as I did in that moment, because I was good at it, and then I failed at it. I hated it when I was good at it, and now I even hate it that much more as I feel like I failed. And I remember looking at a lot of people, out through the window, a lot of people walking in the streets, a lot of cars, and I remember asking questions of myself. What do they do, and why do they do it? And did they choose it? And it sort of begged the question: does any of us really choose our life? Do we really ever choose it? Do we choose where we're born? Do we choose who our parents are? Do we choose what our strengths and weaknesses are? Do we choose how they're nurtured or how they're stifled? There's so much that we don't choose in our life. But it occurred to me, just because you don't choose it doesn't mean that you can't take ownership of it, that you can find your reason, right? So that was a confrontational point inside myself that made me say, my epiphany is, I'm going to find my reason. I'm going to find what motivates me, what inspires me, not based out of fear, but the complete opposite, which is love. And I remember seeing this show on 60 Minutes in America, and it was about this charter school operators, these two great guys who I gotten to know pretty well over the years, Michael Feinberg and David Levin. It's called the KIPP program, Knowledge is Power program. They have about 200 schools in America. And I remember seeing them taking these children who had nothing, who had, absolutely nothing, who were being relegated to an education that was by far less than other kids. And these were kids that really didn't have choice. I looked at them and I said, geez, here I am complaining about being number one in the world. And here it is, because I didn't choose tennis. And here it is, these kids can't even have a chance in life, any hope, because of their circumstances. And with what these guys were doing, they were changing generationally that sort of activity. Their result of not having choice means gangs, and means incarceration, and means all sorts of stuff. And it just clicked for me. I said, this is what I need to do. I need to take everything that I've suffered, everything that I've learned, and I need to transfer it into children that really don't have choice. And it was like overnight when I got into education and doing my own charter school in the most impoverished neighborhood of my city, which is it's the fifth largest school district in America. And that connection I had between using what I suffered for so many years, using it to change the lives of those kids that are really living circumstances far worse than I lived. I identified and connected with it. And as a result, that sort of became my fuel. And then when I got out of my own way and put my eyes on something else, tennis didn't seem so personal anymore. It seemed like it was just an opportunity for me to, not just raise resources but also to have a platform to talk about what's really important, and that gave me another 10 years in the game with far more success and far more, connection.
Man, this is your purpose. Spreading inspiration, spreading these kind of mentality based stories. I personally feel like every human has two phases when it comes to purpose. The first is building your own platform, building it yourself with the tools that you're given by God, by the universe. And once you're standing on that platform, that's when you do your thing called the higher purpose. So maybe that platform you built up for yourself was tennis. Then you found your higher purpose, which is spreading joy in the world, making the world a better place.
Well, I certainly hope so, but I think the one area that I kind of realized is, we're part of this journey together, whether we choose to accept it or not. Whether we choose to add to it or not. What you do, whether it's good or bad, will dictate a lot of your it will dictate the joy you feel. It will dictate the impact you have. It will dictate so many things. So it's like if we can't help but be a part of this participation, then why not choose making an impactful difference, even if it's just a smile or helping somebody on a daily basis. I mean, maybe you could say I've been blessed because I have a platform that can reach more people, but truly reaching one is just as important, and so that's what kind of pushes my buttons. And education to me is crucial, because I think when you expect a lot from a child, it means you think a lot of a child, and what greater, not to reduce children to a commodity, but what greater commodity exists in the world than our future, right? And our future are children. So there's so much to be said for when a brain is nimble and elastic and a spirit is open and willing to be able to deliver to them the platform that they have the ability to change the world too, through their talents, whether it's their artistic skills, whether it's their musical skills, whether it's their writing skills, whether it's their engineering skills. We're all playing a desperate role to the human spirit's not meant to be separated, and I think children is a great example of that.
Yeah, I don't think too many people are aware of all the work you're doing in India with Square Panda. So I mean, I wouldn't want to take people through that. Let you take people through it. But I'd also just want to add this one thing before you begin, which is that you speak so much about elevating children, probably elevating people younger than yourself. Do you feel like you're trying to do it for that younger version of yourself in your heart? You're like, maybe I was just pushed into this one thing, but let's allow children to blossom in multiple directions. So is that a part of everything you're doing?
I think my intensity of activity is a result of how much I empathize and connect to those children. Yes. I also believe my lack of education was a huge part of my source of angst in my life, and my lack of options, my lack of feeling self-worth, that what I feel actually matters, right? So all those experiences definitely sticks gasoline on the fire that burns, within me to make a difference in those children. And everything I'd gone through as a tennis player, because tennis, you don't have to be good. You just have to be better than one person, right? So you're always problem solving. And when you take the skill sets that I learned as a tennis player, and then you take the empathy that I have towards children that feel probably even deeper and worse than I ever felt, you combine them, and it's amazing how the story has played out, because I built this school in Las Vegas. I had 1,200 kids in the school, and I had 3,000 on the waiting list. So as a tennis player, I sort of say that makes me twice the failure I am the success. I mean, we got to figure out a way to help these kids that want the help. And I wasn't an educator, I wasn't an operator, but I was a facilitator. I mean, I facilitated this dream for these 1,200 children. I need to think outside the box. And so, long story short, I figured out that we can't wait for the government entirely. We can't really wait for philanthropy entirely, because it's hard for that to scale. But we still have a private sector that can innovate and solve. And what I realize is, when you have a huge societal daunting problem, going to the private sector is a necessary working component to the scale and sustainability of reaching more children. And so what I did is I put together with a gentleman in Southern California this charter school facility fund where we took private dollars, we invested it into the best in class operators and built their school. Because in America, the money from the state follows the child to your school. So we know we have the demand of the child needing a good education. We know we have teachers that want a good learning friendly environment. We know all the components are there. All parents want a great educational seat. So if we can bring this money and build a school in a tough neighborhood on day one, it's going to be filled. Well, there's a certain amount of revenue there. And so I put together this business model that doesn't ride the backs of parents, doesn't ride the backs of our school system, doesn't ride the backs of the children, but it doesn't ask people to give away their money. So it's this nice, healthy relationship. So it took me 15 years to build one school. And in the last 8 to 9 years, we built 125 across America, right? So it's reaching more kids, 100,000 kids more or less. But with that and watching all these great operators, I saw the central sore spot. The central sore spot was early childhood literacy and English second language learning. Every great teacher, every great school has to focus on this, and they all know it. They all know it. And because when you cross that Rubicon from learning to read to learn, you're now processing content. So your educational journey takes a huge leap forward while other kids are just trying to learn to read, and they don't speak English at home. They need to learn English. And so I helped build this edtech company about 6 years ago called Square Panda. Now it's a digital platform with real neuroscience-backed information. We have the knowledge. I went to Stanford University. I met with Bruce McCandless. I met with the experts in the neurology space, and they know how to individually work with every brain so that we can speed up the learning curve of learning English or literacy, right? So I'm saying we have this information. We don't have a distribution vehicle. So put together this technology company that can actually meet every child where they're at in real time with AI learnings, get faster and faster to adjust to the topography of every child's brain so that we're working on where they're weak and where they're strong. We're using it to speed up that process. And every child's brain and every person's brain works differently. It's not a staircase where you learn the alphabet, you learn these words. It's not that. We have to figure out phonological awareness. We have to figure out, so many, there's 8 vectors of activity going on. And I realize technology is a heck of a way to solve for that individualized, personalized teaching in a real-time basis to help speed up the act of learning English or becoming very literate in it. It's 21st century communication skills, right? Learning to communicate. I believe everybody should stay in their mother tongue unquestionably, but if you can communicate in English, it only adds to the great opportunities and takes people out of a certain walk of life and moves them into the next. So when I really saw the efficacy of what we're doing, India was close to my heart because, first of all, of how much injustice from a volume perspective, right? How many kids are left outside the box, right? How many kids we can reach. And for me, that's what it's always been about. It's always been about finding ways to scale and reach more children.
Beautiful. I mean, I've got to highlight your past again. They say that when you're going through that little level of human suffering, you're suffering for the sake of preventing the suffering for future versions of yourself. And that's pretty much what you're doing in your work. You highlighted the fact that every kid's brain is different. Probably when you were playing tennis as a kid, when you were learning and getting better at it, you're like, okay, I'm getting better at this, but I wish I was taught in this different way. And maybe that's resulted in this business at this point of your life.
I'm a big fan of learning something that in 10 minutes that took somebody 10 years. And I'm even a bigger fan of teaching somebody what's taken me a decade and to teach them in 10 minutes because I believe that's the way it should be.
When we're speaking about teaching and learning, I have to highlight tennis in your life because that's the activity that you're known for. That's the activity that's attached to your name. So the overall sport of tennis, while I'm sure that it teaches you so many things, if you had to highlight three things that changed you as a person, what would you highlight?
Well, geez, I think if you, I thought you were going somewhere with that question, but then you made it so clear at the end. What are three things that have changed my life? It's the same three things that have changed probably everybody's life, which is our three people. I mean, it's always a person that has the most impact on you. You know, it's always that, right? So ultimately, my trainer, as an example, for 21 years professionally, he acted as my father more than anything. Although he helped me become a better athlete, he was the first one to make me feel like I was worth being cared about. And how what kind of price tag do you put on that? When you grow up not feeling that way, right? So he would be one. My wife would be another. Here's a person that has taught me how to live every day what it is you value, and how to talk less about it and do more about it. And I mean, that's incredible. My brother through those early years on the road with me. I mean, if I didn't have him with me on the road, I mean, I don't think I could have made it through, right? So it's like it's always people that change you the most. But as far as the sport goes, I mean, it teaches you so many things. It teaches you, as I mentioned, the problem solving aspect. It teaches you discipline. It teaches you how to really go within in the most intense moments, because you don't have anybody out there. You can't talk to anybody. You can't pass the ball. You can't call a timeout. You have to just you have to find a way. So it teaches you how to kind of be quiet in the loudest moments. You know what I mean? And it teaches you. I mean, it's remarkable what you learn from tennis. I've taken it and applied it to my mission in life, and certainly all my activities.
Andre, do you think that tennis also taught you mental toughness? And when you're speaking about mental toughness as a subject, do you think that the future children of the world should be taught mental toughness in some form?
Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, um, yeah, I mean, I think uh, it does teach it to you, but it doesn't teach it to you in a silo. It teaches it to you because what you end up realizing is you need to understand your identity. Because if your identity is tied to what the scoreboard says, um, you you are always going to struggle mentally. So I think it gets to your mind through your spirit, because you can't just teach a kid how to be mentally tough. But if you teach a kid who their identity really is, who they really are, then it gives them the platform to learn how to apply their mind through their already given identity, right? So I think without that component, it's hard to become mentally tough. It's hard to remove the ego. It's hard to to hear things objectively. It's hard to once you understand that tennis is what you do, it's not who you are. You can then be a vehicle for whatever talent you have, and then your mind is allowed to be at its best. So I think it's a real holistic approach that we need to do with our children, and that's why I love what's going on with Square Panda, because it's giving every individual child that mini success story, that they can do it, that they're good. It really reinforces all the tools they need from an identity standpoint, and from a success step to step standpoint. That being tough mentally is a function of going, I've been through this before. I accomplished this. I never thought I was capable of it. I can do this now. And so I think it all kind of works together.
Um, Andre, do you think that your generation was tougher than the current generations? Because I mean, we had social media growing up, and that's completely changed the way the human mind operates. Whether I'm not just speaking about you as a teenager, I'm also speaking about you in your 20s. I'm sure
Yeah.
you guys had your own set of challenges and your own handicaps compared to this generation, but this generation's also got some curses of itself. So when it comes to mental health, how do you think things were different for you guys as compared to now?
Well, I mean, it's a lot different. Social media is a double-edged sword, and it's a weapon if you use it wrong, and it's a powerful tool if you use it correctly. I mean, it's like a car. I mean, you can use a car and do a lot of damage, or you can use it to be very productive. But I think the discipline in it and the parameters that you need to stick around it is again tied to who you are versus what you're looking to be validated for. You know what I mean? And I think social media, if you have that sort of deficiency of identity, whether it's through how you were raised or whether it's through your value system, I think social media then becomes highly more important, and you become reactive to your life as opposed to proactive. So I do think it's a very dangerous field of landmines. I think it is tougher these days in many ways because you can be so distracted, and you can underestimate how much energy you're putting in to something that isn't that you don't recognize like directly. So in tennis you have to train, you have to rest, you have to eat, you have to take care of your body, you have to do so many things that if in between all this your mind is focused on other things, I just don't think there's enough room to be the most of yourself without that piece being locked. And I know a lot of players these days who were raised very clear on this, and as a result they're not defined by it. And then I know other players that are really defined by how they're perceived. And that's really looking for validation from the wrong places. And I don't think that helps you in the biggest of moments on a tennis court when you're all alone.
How do you switch off from the fame that you get along the way? Like, have you seen I'm sure you've seen Rocky and you've seen the Rocky movies. In
Yeah.
Rocky Part 3, where he loses to Clubber Lang because he kind of becomes soft. I mean, I would assume that happens to like every athlete in the world at some point where you kind of become a little soft. So the question is, how do you switch off from the fame? And also, if you're in the middle of a really important match, how do you switch off from the crowd and just keep it between you, the ball, and your opponent?
Well, those are kind of two separate questions,
Okay.
although they're very, they can appear very similar. When you talk about separating from the crowd, big moments, a lot of distractions, you learn this. You learn that I can't control everything, but there's certain things I can control, and if I control those things better than my opponent, then I have an advantage, right? So, but it's the same thing that drives you in training. You train alone, and you're saying to yourself, "Well, geez, I don't know what my opponent's doing." So somewhere deep inside of yourself, you push yourself a little bit more. So you end up becoming a tortured perfectionist when it comes to those sorts of skill sets in tennis. But separating the fame and the work is a fundamental perspective. I mean, um, it's a fundamental engagement in life that you don't see yourself as better than anybody else or better off than anybody else. You see yourself as part of a tapestry. I'm just part of this, and it's a privilege to give somebody a break from their life for 2 hours, and now it's a privilege for me to hopefully change a generation, right? So it's all about that sort of perspective. And I don't know. Kids learn more what they see than what you tell them. I know that from raising two children, and 19 and 17 years old now. And the same thing I think for adults. I think the mentorships that really seem to exist in those that have a healthy value system and perspective seem to be very clear and defined. And those that sort of float around more with their own sense of who they are, you can see that there's not any established really somebody who's walking it out with them on a daily basis, because that's where you really learn. You really learn by seeing how somebody reacts in certain situations than somebody telling you how you should react in a certain situation. You know what I mean? It's like that to me is, I've always said, like rules without relationship leads to rebellion, and that's the way it is in raising children. And that's the way it is in developing friendships and relationships. You just can't sort of say, this is how we're going to do it. You have to be willing to meet somebody where they are, understand where they are, and then help them take the next step. And I think that's where mentorship, coaching, I think all those things are need to be very nuanced.
And what about when you're playing the match in that tennis meditation? How about, like, could you describe that a little bit?
Yeah, I can. I can say that the first thing you learn in tennis is the last thing you learn in tennis, which is, watch the ball, focus on the ball, move your feet. These are the basic fundamentals. The more you can be clear on what you need to focus on, and simple about that activity, the rest comes through, right? So yeah, I've played so many matches, and guys have played so many matches that they seem like they're making all these decisions, but a lot of them are sort of seared truths that they're just applying, and what they're really focused on is a basic activity, and treating every point the same, so that every point's important, so that when the point really does get important, you're not changing anything. You're just continuing what you do. I remember one time talking to Carl Lewis, who used to be one of the fastest men in the world. And I asked him, why are you always passing people like at 60 meters? I mean, how come, what's your strength that makes you get faster like that? And he says, I don't get faster. He goes, I just don't slow down. Everybody else slows down. And I thought that was so fascinating and so true in life. He says, what he's doing is he's just running so perfectly. He's taking care of everything he needs to. Everybody else is sort of dealing with other things. And sure enough, he ends up winning. So that's what I always try to remember. If you just control your controllables, as much as you can, and then focus on the simple things, and then let your life experiences play out in a very natural way, it comes together.
So do the basics and stay in the moment. That's probably what I get from your answer.
Yes, the most important point is the next one. It's not the last one. It's the next one, and it's not the one that you're imagining, 2 hours from now. It's the one right here now.
How was your life after you retired? How is it right now? And was there an evolution even in that phase? Because I feel like you're a thinker, you're an analyzer, you're an observer. So I'd love to know what happened. And I also see a lot of joy in your eyes at this phase of your life. So I'd love to know how you achieve this kind of joy.
I don't know. I'd be so alternative. I mean, I have my moments, right? I mean, listen, some days I wake up and I say, it's just going by too fast. I mean, it's just going by too fast. And then that only is the stimulus for me to say, well, then make the most of what today can be, and the best way for me to do that is to care about what we're talking about right now. That's the best way for me to maximize the day right now. Right. So I think it's a muscle built, but it's also a discipline of activation, a discipline of application. Right. So you have to apply it. You have to be quiet. You have to recognize moments for what they are, and you have to be present in them. And joy can come along on the sidelines. It's that's kind of how it's felt to me.
Okay, Andre, we've got to move to the final section of the podcast, which is all the Twitterverse questions. So this is sort of like a rapid fire round, just like quick questions from all your Indian fans. Twitter India lost its mind when they found out that Andre Agassi is on an Indian podcast. So, man, from the bottom of my heart, firstly, thank you. Secondly, okay, Nikita Pawar. That's the first question. She asks, what does Andre think of the big three dominating the sport right now? And when do you think the next gen will finally take over?
Well, what I think we're in an amazing time. If you think about what we had to watch, I mean, or have had the privilege of watching over the last 15 years. I mean, you've watched three guys win 20, 40, 58 Grand Slams. And what is that, 14 years almost of Grand Slams where only three guys are winning it, and they're having to beat each other. So first thing that crosses my mind, can you imagine if one of these guys was playing tennis during an era when the other two weren't there? I mean, how many would they possibly have? It's pretty remarkable, and to have the best on hard court, the best on grass, the best on clay, it's like, wow, and to have them in the same generation, wow. I mean, it's it's lights out. It took 70 years for 5 people to win all the Grand Slams. I was the 5th person to do it. It took just that generation, and then there's 3 that have done it. So uh, there's so many ways to categorize how impressive it is. But the next gen's on its way. I mean, you see even last week with Tsitsipas winning in Monte Carlo. I mean, you look at Medvedev pushing, knocking on the door of all these slams. You look at Zverev, you look at Team. I mean, these guys, they realize that. I think they realize now that they can't afford to respect the top 3 as much as they have been. They need to start, owning it and then pushing themselves to that next level. It's a tough task. I don't know when that's going to happen. Obviously, I can't make any predictions, but I do believe we're in process of seeing some of those new gen players push into the top.
You think it's that cutthroat mentality that they need to kind of embrace?
You have to believe it. I mean, I'll give you an example. I turned pro at 16, and I broke into the top 3 in the world in 2 years when I was 18 years old. Didn't win a slam till I was 22. Courier, Pete, and Chang, because they saw me do it, they just charged right through and won a Grand Slam before I did, even though it seemed like they were, years behind me and the evolution of our careers. Once somebody shows that it's not Herculean, you can actually do it, and people start believing it, then you'll see a locomotive train just pushing that direction. But you have to believe it.
Yeah. I mean, when you want that big change in life, I believe that you've really got to go for it with everything you've got. Lena Soni asks a beautiful question. One thing that the beautiful Steffi Graff has taught Andre Agassi.
I kind of touched on it. I think the most powerful thing she teaches me is how to live your values on a daily basis, because she lives it in the moment. She lives it in context of a journey. She's not reactive. She's very she approaches every tough time in life with the belief that she's going to get through it, and also with kindness, love, and empathy. And when you see it, it kind of calms you down and helps you sort of look at some tough situations through a different lens, instead of feeling like you have to fight the world. So I just it's just a privilege to have in my life on a daily basis.
Okay, lots of questions about Federer and Rafa specifically, because this is a very Federer and Rafa oriented country as well. But I'm sure that once you've played tennis yourself, once you've had a tennis career, you're seeing things from another perspective as well. You're seeing things from within their minds. So the question is, what do you think makes them special, Federer and Rafa? This is from Sanchit Keswani.
Oh, geez. I mean, I don't know how nuanced you want me to get with it, but let me just say, anybody that comes into tennis, I don't care if it's Pete, myself, McEnroe, Lendl, I mean, any generation, the person that comes in to be number one usually brings a couple things to the game that nobody's ever seen before. That's kind of what defines, when you saw Pete come in, nobody had a serve like that. Nobody, it just was remarkable. He had something that just nobody else. So everybody else has to deal with it, right? I mean, mine was ball striking and taking the ball early off both sides. It's like nobody played that way when I came into the game. So when you look at Fed, for example, I mean, I played him in the finals of 2005 U.S. Open, and there was no safe place on the court. He, at the time, he probably had the best forehand in the world. When he played Roddick, he always aced Roddick more than Roddick aced him. So you have to give his serve credit. You have to give his return credit. His movement was a joke. His hands at net were a joke. The versatility, where he might have had 5 things individually better than everybody else on the tour. It's like a golfer who leads in fairways hit, greens hit, and putts. It's like hard to beat that guy, right? So Fed that. I mean, then Rafa comes along and he brings such enormous spin to the game that it actually changes the rules of engagement. So you have two things with Rafa that are clearly stand out to me, is that because he can hit the ball and it's not in till it bounces, right? That changes positions in the court, where you can play. That offsets a lot of, all those other qualities I mentioned about Fed, and plus his power of movement, his strength and endurance and physicality is kind of unmatched, right? So you have him bringing that into it, and then you got, well, you only asked me about those two guys, but then Novak has his own sort of thing that he brings to the table. So when you look at these great players, they always do something that nobody else does, and that's what gives them the chance to sit at number one for a period of time.
You know that the follow-up question is going to be, what did Andre Agassi bring to the table, according to himself?
Yeah, well, it's easy to say in hindsight because I'm only saying it compared to what existed before me, right? So when I came into the game, I couldn't believe that there were only a few people that had a big forehand. Like Lendl had a big forehand, and then he was pretty conservative with the backhand, or who sliced the backhand, or you have somebody like a Wilander who was just fantastic at not missing for, 6 hours, you know what I mean? And, but I just couldn't believe that nobody could stand on the baseline and no matter where the ball was, take a full swing at it with confidence, knowing that you're going to be offensively minded and consistent and conservative at the same time. So that's what took people's time away. I kind of came into the game and just took people's time away. And part of the reason was my ball striking was a strength of mine. Other reason would be that I had fundamentals that allowed me to handle pace and generate pace, right? So that allowed me to play against guys that came forward, guys that were defensive, and allowed me to play through multiple generations when the speed of the game increased and the spin started to change. So that gave me a chance to play through 4 or 5, generations of players.
Beautiful. Okay. Adi Savla asks, what's your favorite sport apart from tennis?
Favorite sport to watch, or I would imagine to watch. This is really strange to say, but I'm not a sports watcher. I mean, I've never been. I've never been. I look at something, I try to understand it, but it's never been something I gravitate towards. But if I had to watch a sporting event live, I probably would say hockey. I think hockey is one of the most exciting sports live to watch. A lot of sports are better on TV, and there are a handful of sports that are better live. Hockey, to me, is the difference between TV and live is remarkable.
Do you pick up things from other sport when you're an active athlete?
Tennis is so unique in that it's an individual sport, so there's just no there's no blaming anybody else, right? Think about it, even in American football, if the field goal kicker misses the field goal, he can always argue, well, if you had made that tackle, I wouldn't have had to kick that field goal because we would have had first down, right? So it's like, so everybody has to work together in basketball and all the sports, everybody has to work together. And then you look at individual sports. The only one I draw a lot of connection to as it relates to maybe learning something would be boxing, or because it's really one-on-one, and what I do affects what you do. While golf is an individual activity, you're really just kind of playing yourself in the course, right? So tennis is unique in that way.
Okay, this next question's from my mom, who's a big fan. She wants to ask you again about childhood, that you went that extra mile even when you were a child when it came to discipline. So was there some secret formula back then when you were 12, 13-year-old training? Were you having some conversations with yourself to push yourself that extra mile?
Well, yeah, my dad was so hard on me that by the time I was 7 years old, I didn't need him anymore to be hard on me because I was harder on myself. That's probably the best way I could frame it.
So it was just intense self-talk that you've got to do it.
Yes, when you don't have options, fear is one heck of a motivator, and is it ideal? No, it's not ideal. It led to some pretty difficult times. If I didn't have it, would I have done as much? Hard to say. But the truth was that was all motivated by fear of failing, fear of what else would I do if I couldn't do this, and then the second half was the complete opposite.
Okay. Viraj Sheth, my manager, asks, how have your sporting learnings translated into the business world? I'd probably highlight, other than the problem solving aspect of tennis that you already mentioned, what else carries over into business?
Well, I mean, I'm not sure how many ways it's translated, but the problem solving is working backwards from an objective and figuring out what your path is going to be. The discipline is understanding if you how much momentum you build by just taking one step every day. The idea that you don't have to be good, better than one person, kind of translates to me in business that you're always gonna run into struggles and difficulties, and as a result, you need that sense of perseverance. You need that sense of big picture context and small picture, applications. I mean, there's so many that it's hard to separate in a lot of cases.
Okay. And the last one from the Twitterverse section, Snehal Pradhan, she's a former cricketer herself. She says, advice for those who are good at things that they don't enjoy doing.
Um, if that means you're forced to do it because you're young, if that means you don't know what else to do because it is a talent of yours, my advice would be, on the former, find your reason for what you do. I think that's always achievable. To connect to something that matters to you and find a way to connect it to what it is you do. If you just have a talent that you don't enjoy, I would say, listen. I mean, everybody. I believe that being good at tennis is weird. There were times I stepped on a tennis court and I literally said to myself, I can't believe I know how to do this. And so I was really outside my own skin, kind of going, but it helped me a lot to treat myself as just a vessel for something, right? To get out of my own way and just to let what I've been given be a gift to others, right? So I think the fundamental would be taking your eyes off yourself and putting it on something else. That helps, allowing yourself to do something you don't like so much, to its own ability, and it gives you a different value system and engagement. The connection of engagement changes dramatically.
Do you believe in a higher power? Do you believe in God?
Absolutely.
And do you think that he played through you sometimes when you were on the court?
Oh, I think that's a pretty basic way of categorizing it, in the sense that you know we don't have a say what our talents are. He doesn't control the winning and the losing. I don't believe God controls how I hit a tennis ball. I think it's a process, and it's a participation. And if you allow yourself to embrace that, I think it allows you to be the best that you can be. But again, I think that wisdom on a tennis court is wisdom that you can find in life, by being aware of that presence in every person, place, and moment.
Man, I think, lots of people out there don't believe in God, but most human beings believe in doing good. I strongly believe in God, but what I figured over time is that it's the same thing. Doing good is the same as doing God's work in this planet. I feel like you're an extremely blessed person, Andre Agassi. I feel like you were given these gifts for a reason, and you are doing a lot of God's work with everything you're doing outside of the tennis world as well. So you're using your platform in the best possible way. I'd
And we're
probably,
not and we're not doing good to try to reach God. We're recognizing Him, at His core.
yeah, 100%. While Square Panda and every other business that you're doing might seem like a business on the outside, I can see how motivated and how passionate you are about these projects when you're talking about helping kids, when you're talking about giving kids the best possible mindset specific to them. It's just beautiful. Like, I feel like you were given your life for a reason. And as you're growing older, you're kind of making the world a better place through all your own experiences.
Well, my objective is to finish strong. Let me put it that way.
Mm. Specifically about Square Panda, what do you have to say to the Indian audience listening to it till this point?
Well, I have to say that it gives me a great excuse to come down there a lot, which I'll be coming there again shortly when the environment allows. I would say that we're investing a lot into the integrity of our content, localizing our platform to the native tongue, and moving into government schools that allow us to reach the neediest and the most children. And I hope you continue to embrace me, because you're going to see me a lot.
India's waiting for you. Andre, you've got to travel a little bit in the Himalayas. I feel there's a lot of experiences. I don't know if you have already, but that's one thing I would suggest to you on a very personal level.
Thank you for that. There's so much I want to see over there, and I pray that every time I come down there, there's an opportunity to take something in.
Spend some extended time here. Like, spend some time with your family. I mean, again, I'm no one to tell you this, but I do believe that there's pieces of yourself you'll discover here when you're here for like 1 or 2 months continuously, and you're exploring the mountains, you're exploring the little towns around the mountains. There's a lot of self discovery that happens in those little pockets. So once the world is done with COVID, India's going to be welcoming you.
Well, I believe you wholeheartedly. Thank you very much.
God bless you, Andre Agassi. Thank you for being on the Ranveer Show.
It was a pleasure.